At some point, you need to disclose whether you have uh, bias to a certain source or another, or if there is emerging kind of clinical evidence that points to kind of one outcome. Or I think there's also there are other lineages that are less sort of clinical and research oriented in nature. And sort of community sort of wisdom. And there's also personal experience. And one thing that I try and do is give people a range of that kind of information, and I'll disclose to a certain extent, whether I might have instincts about something being reliable, but I'm also very transparent about where, there may be less certainty, and someone may need to learn for themselves, or find out for themselves. I'm quite flexible in that way, and I think a good coach, psychedelic therapist, or integration specialist is going to be going to have a relatively open mind about what's possible in this work. So just coming back to the integration side, that ends up being it follows a similar thread. It's not directive. It's not, there isn't a set protocol. I think it has to be a question of meeting someone where they're at, seeing how they're doing, helping them make sense of what may have happened, and what they want to do now, what they can do now. There's also just a question of, and I think this is where there are important considerations here for the field. Ensuring that you're able to support someone, right? Like, psychedelics can be very disruptive. That's their part of their power and potential, right? A system, whether it's a nervous system or it's an internal family system or it's a worldview or whatever, that's not, or coping habits, mechanisms that haven't been serving the individual, that are disrupted. That can be an amazing blessing to sort of retool the system and move on in the world in a more constructive way. But it can also someone can be destabilized because they rely on those frameworks or worldviews or whatever it is, coping mechanisms. And, there is training in therapy more specifically that is particularly attuned to someone that is quite dysregulated, right? Or more anxious or more depressed, or just more activated, re-traumatized, right? All these kinds of things. So knowing your own limits as a practitioner, and saying, I'm not equipped to help someone here in this particular case, is really important. I think is really important. And by the way, that's not unique to coaches. A lot of the education that we do at Fluence, for example, for therapists and healthcare workers, is a kind of de-education, or reframing of certain assumptions that might be made around when someone, just because someone is kind of been deconstructed a little bit, doesn't mean they're necessarily unwell. That could be part of a process or a spiritual emergence that isn't necessarily a spiritual, or emergency, right? It could be, they could be going through something very strange that a more Western clinical worldview does does not really have a solid framework for or way to understand it, and a little bit of patience, kind of, and care, and an open mind, and some, experience and other reference points can often make the difference to help someone move through that and then actually continue to grow. But it's not a sure thing. All kinds of things can happen. People can harm themselves as much as they can help themselves.
Do you have certain modalities where you think like they are more effective than others in the integration?
I mean, it depends on the goal, right? It depends on, like, we say, an integration of what? Like, are we talking about what kind of person, what kind of experience? I'm so hesitant to speak generally because things can really vary. But
well, could you tell us a couple of stories, perhaps? I know I heard you laugh when on that other podcast. I forgot the host's name, unfortunately. But he said, so what's Joe? Yes, of course. Yes. And he asked, so what's a typical integration coaching journey like? And you just laughed. And I'm like, there is none. But if maybe you could tell a few different particular stories of someone who's like a certain kind of person with a certain kind of goal, and so people can get a bit of a feel for what that journey might look like and feel like.
Mm-hmm. Well, the first thing I was going to say, just like in response to Julia's question, is like I'm buffering my answer a little bit, but I do have my own kind of training and background and orientations that inevitably do sort of come up, right? So, mindfulness being one of them, and just really being able to, turn one's attention toward experience, especially if one has a habit of avoiding experience, right? So, psychedelics will often, create conditions like that are like relatively, spontaneously, if we have habits of avoiding our present moment experience, and brought back to it so that we're aware of the body, aware of the breath, aware of the present moment and its expansiveness, and all the different ways that maybe we've been avoiding that experience because of trauma or what have you. So integration there can often, reminding folks of whatever experience they've had there, or providing a framework to understand that experience, and then again bringing folks back to that in integration is something that can happen. But again, different folks, depending on where they're at, can benefit from different kinds of interventions. Not even necessarily interventions, but practices, right? Like someone may benefit from cultivating non-ordinary states of consciousness, right? Like, breath work or meditation. Like, what they might need is to sort of get back to that experience. Other folks really may need to ground themselves. They may have gone pretty far out there, and what they could benefit from is some physical exercise or time with friends in nature, right? Like, you're moving aspects of your whole system in different directions on the spectrum. So I also, internal family systems, again, it's a therapeutic modality, but it's used in psychedelic assisted therapy, and MDMA assisted therapy, and is quite effective and interesting, I think, for working with material that comes up in psychedelic work. And it doesn't necessarily have to be sort of therapeutic and clinical in nature. It can be on the coaching side. So, I mean, mindfulness and IFS are two modalities that come to mind that I would point to. Also, anything that's really somatic, that really gets you into and working with the body, in addition to the mind. Most of us are so many of us are really just spend so much time up here, and really there's like, I don't really get too esoteric and woo about stuff unless I feel it's really safe to do that and appropriate. And even that, I've got my one foot in the material world. But, like there are different areas in the body that produce and work with serotonin, for example, if you want to be scientific materialist about it. But like the gut and the heart are real points of wisdom, and often they're not connected, and they're not consciously kind of integrated, and the channels get opened up when you work with psychedelics. So finding ways to really stay connected to the body is another really important modality.